After comments on my other videos, I decided it'd be interesting to see how a more traditional HP 800 G3 small form factor NAS would perform. And with the power of having a second one, I was able to have some additional fun. The specs of this build are i5 6500T, 32 gig of DDR4, dual 3.5-inch 2TB drives, 32 gig boot SSD, and a 512 gig NVMe drive for caching. The differences in power usage were surprising. The 3.5-inch build drew less power idle than the SSD build. I suspect the difference is because the SSD build has more drives to keep going along with the SAS controller. The 3.5-inch build was pulling 16.7 watts idle versus the SSD build, which was pulling 22 watts idle. As I expected though, the 3.5-inch spinning disks would draw more power while in use. When doing a 40 gig file transfer over the network, the 3.5-inch build drew 29.2 watts on average compared to the 28.6 watt average that the SSD build was pulling. Not a lot more, but it is 0.6 watts more. I think overall though, the 3.5-inch setup may use less power if you aren't regularly accessing it. Also worth noting, the SSD build has an i3 6100T, while the 3.5-inch build had a i5 6500T, which will add some minor variance in the numbers. Even though both processors are rated for the same 35 watt TDP, the i5 can draw a little more power under load, which could add to a difference you'll see. Build-wise, the dual 3.5-inch setup was easier to put together, mostly because you're using the PC as intended. On top of that, the advantage of this build is you have access to all 4 PCI Express slots, as you can see. And access to all those slots gives you upgrade potential for things like GPU for transcoding or faster networking. With the SSD build, you will have to choose between having that X4 slot on the left for either faster networking or a GPU to transcode video. And then interestingly enough, with the current drive sizes, it's a toss-up on which build is better, assuming money is no object. So as of today, 24 terabyte 3.5-inch drives are the biggest you can readily buy, and 8 terabyte SATA SSDs are the most common large capacity if you don't go with SAS or NVMe. In one way or another, you're looking at a feasible max capacity of 48 terabyte without going exotic. And to do 48 terabyte of new 3.5-inch hard drives, that would set you back $1,000. And if you went with 48 terabyte of new SSDs, that would set you back $3,600. An interesting note on the build cost is the 3.5-inch build is cheaper to build than the SSD build, before you add the cost of storage drives. And if you build them exactly like I did, the SSD NAS would cost you around $196, and the 3.5-inch NAS would cost you around $135 to build. And obviously, the difference in price is due to all the extra parts the SSD NAS requires, because you got these fancy adapter trays the 2.5-inch drives are sitting on. You need power splitters, and you need fan power splitters, and a fan, and SAS controller. But you could cut some corners on the SSD NAS and resort to some creative drive mounting. I mean, there's nothing to say you couldn't just use a bunch of double-sided sticky tape to mount these in there. And if you did cut corners and get creative like that, you could reduce the cost of the SSD build to $152 basically, is what I was figuring. On top of that, the nice thing about the traditional build is it always can be upgraded later. I mean, prices are continuing to drop on hardware, so maybe you start with the cheaper route now, and if you want to upgrade and go fancy, And I think, considering long-term operating costs, though, the 3.5-inch build will save you more money over time. And ultimately, the choice comes down to deciding between the high reliability and performance of solid-state drives versus having affordable storage. But overall, I mean, I can't believe how capable these HPs are for their size. I mean, these things are powerhouses. They can't even begin to touch what you'd be able to do with a Dell, because the Dells just are so limited. But hopefully found that all interesting, and thanks for watching.